Welcome to the Talent Time Machine, the podcast that takes you on a journey through time to explore the future of work. In today's episode, we'll be discussing a bold idea. By the year 2050, retirement as we know it will no longer exist. Instead, businesses will embrace a new model of work that emphasizes flexibility, lifelong learning, and intergenerational collaboration. With plunging birth rates and a broken financial model for retirement, how much longer will we work? What will the role of older workers be, and how will companies have to adjust to a wider spread of ages in the workplace? In this episode, we'll explore what this new model of work could look like and how businesses can start preparing now for the changes to come. We'll be speaking with Kim Neeson, an experienced business coach for women who are tired of chasing work-life balance. She'll help us understand how individuals and organizations can thrive in a world where retirement is a thing of the past. So, let's get started. Kim, welcome. Nice to have you on the podcast. Let's imagine that the year is 2050 and we're talking about retirement and retirement being very much a thing of the past. What does the new world of work look like? I had a grandfather who actually was retired as long as he was in the working world. Obviously not sustainable. So how is this dynamic going to change as humans live longer and as work really evolves? What's the world of 2050 look like?
Well, I think we're all working a lot longer than we anticipated, but I think it will look different. I mean, we're not probably going to be working the grind of the 9 to 5, I think, for a number of reasons. First of all, physically, we're still going to age no matter what. And things do change for us in that regard. And I think to keep engaged in society and to feel a part of something and not isolated out, we're all going to have to be doing something with our lives. And I really do think we will change our working lives significantly over time, but that we will still be doing something that's going to give us, whether it's a part-time sort of employment, or perhaps the company you work with is going to now look at, it's not, mandatory retirement at 65 or whatever age it may be. It's now you move into a different sort of mode with the company where perhaps you're working 2 days a week, or you're, so you still keep that historical sort of information that carries through with a company. Maybe you're mentoring the next generation coming up behind you. You're there to give that historical perspective where it's needed.
And if you think of the employers, so I'm thinking about our thousands of folks that sit in our company. We're not set up to have that kind of very flexible knowledge working. We're not set up to have someone plug in a very different way. So what do you think some of the biggest challenges we're going to face as this dynamic hits the market, but businesses are still structured largely like they were 50 years ago?
Businesses have to change. And I think the pandemic, if that didn't highlight that to every business out there,
right,
I don't know what will, because the workforce of 2019 is not coming back. It's never going to look like it did in 2019. So I think right now we're in a real change time, because company culture is going to be the thing that really drives productivity, that drives the business visions and goals. And so that's creating a culture where companies are going to have to reassess how they've done things. You can't expect that all your employees are just going to toe the line and, you're very replaceable, because guess what? You seem to have a shortage of people who actually want to work or are qualified to do those jobs. And so we want to keep people engaged. They have purpose and meaning, and they feel that what they're doing in their job has all of those elements. And so we're going to have to restructure what companies look like if they're going to retain their talent. And as well, because of the shortage of workers, look at, as we know, that the populations are getting older, birth rates are down. So who is going to do all this work? And you're going to have to engage people in a way that, as you get older, you may want to do some other things. I know for myself, I had my own business for many years, and when I sold and kind of wound out of that, I knew I still wanted to do something. I rewired myself, but I wanted to be able to do it on different terms than I didn't want 60-hour weeks anymore. And so I think companies will have to recognize that, as people age, there's still value. They can still do things, they can still earn a living. But, maybe they're going to have 2 months off a year. Maybe they're going to have more vacation time, but, their salary or payment method will reflect that. And you'll still have income coming in as an older person and not just relying on pension plans or on the government pension plans, which who knows if there'll be any money left.
Right. I'm so glad I paid into Social Security all those years for me to draw nothing, $0 out of it when it's time. It's funny that you mentioned the older workforce. I have a 20-year-old son, and how he thinks about work and the role of work in his life is so different than how I thought about it, how my parents thought about it. So certainly we have to accommodate for the older generation being more flexible, but I see that he's going to demand just as much flexibility. He does not envision himself living to 90 and working at one company. We're already seeing people change jobs 2, 3, 4, 18 times in a career. And he's trying to get almost in his mind, like, where's my stretch of career for a few years for me to get my experience so I can do something more flexibly? So, how does that change? I mean, in the future, if we fast forward, employers won't have 25-year tenured employees anymore. That just is not, it's a relic of the past. So that certainly must upset just how we think about everything.
Yes, the days of the gold watch because you served 50 years, they're very safe. They don't have to buy any more gold watches. That's for sure. It is interesting with younger people. Their values are different, and what they want purpose in what they're doing. They're not just satisfied with getting paid some crappy old wage and working their way up the chains. But by the same token, where do you go with that? Because as a person who tries a number of different things, one of the things that gets you moving along the momentum line of earnings, increased earnings, is your experience.
Right.
So how can you find, I'll use the term profession very loosely, but an area where you can grow in different ways and try different avenues, but you can at least have some of that experience carry with you from as you move along the continuum so that you can benefit from it financially. Because if you're always starting at square one, I have no experience in this business, I have no experience in that business, how are you going to, as you age, it's one thing when you're 20 to have that kind of attitude, but now if you're 35, maybe you do want a child, maybe you want to have a home or a car or whatever, travel, all costs money. And if you want to also start thinking about saving for your future at some point, you've got to start doing it early. You can't wait till you're 65 to start thinking about that. So I think that will be an interesting thing that younger people will have to grapple with, because I think that kind of lifestyle will get kind of boring by the time you're 30.
Right. You get kind of stuck, right? I think about, some of the least successful colleagues I've had have been people that hop before they really see the lack of success from their actions. So if you have someone that you work with, they're in a stint for 1.5 years, 2 years, 3 years, like that's actually not long enough if you're at a certain level to get into real trouble or to really, for someone to suss out that you aren't as effective as you maybe purport. If we have people that are like serial hoppers moving from company to company, soon you have no backbone of the people that really had to stick it out. If you're there for 10 years, people know if you get things done or not, right? That time frame is too long. There's too much history. There's too much results. So one of the things we're challenged with even now is if there's not a long enough legacy at your last few roles, you can't tell if they actually were effective or pulled things through because they just sort of make a career out of moving. So I wonder then, it's like not ageism, it's almost reverse ageism for the people that have really had that, you've had to stick with it. You've had to live with your choices. You have to learn from your experiences, looking at people that have not invested in that type of career. And what do companies need to do to bring those two sides together? Because you'd really quickly see a divide in styles and ways of working and sort of lack of understanding, lack of common experience. I mean, what do you think work looks like if you've got those people looking at each other over the conference table or over a Zoom, as it probably will be?
Yeah. It's like in my day,
Exactly. You didn't back in my day. Uphill both ways, snow, all of that. And then and then you have the 20-year-old looking at you like, I don't want your life. I don't want to do what you did. So it's not like we admired those people that really stuck it out in our careers, and they're looking at us like we're nuts.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I survived my professional career of working so long because I have 4 children. So
No.
I had four, and I'm not in Canada. That would be 4 years. I'm in the US, so I had 1 year total of the 4 children. But, I had a break in my work that really does energize you and give you things back. And now people are sort of creating those small micro breaks as they change roles. But, this artificial idea of 62, 65 retirement, will you have a big chunk in the middle of your career that just says, I worked for 10 years solid and then I didn't participate in the workforce for 5 years? And companies and economics have to structure around that because it's more of a work break as opposed to a work and then take a long extended 30-year break at the back end of it. How do you see that evolving? And how does that change sort of the view of it's not a break, you're not finding yourself, that's just not how we work anymore? Do you think that's a reality?
Flexibility is going to be huge. And I think that cuts across every age. As we discussed earlier, 2019's workforce is gone. We're in this new place where people don't know quite what it's going to be. You have a company who says, come back to work 5 days a week, and you have employees rebelling saying, no, I'm not coming back to work. So in terms of taking breaks, I think companies are going to have to allow their employees to have periods of time where, they want to learn something new, they want to enhance what they're doing. And if you can allow someone to do that and still get some productivity out of them, and it gives you time as a company to prepare that maybe they're going to move on, but it gives you that transition period to bring somebody else along or help get the training, et cetera. That might be one way to tackle it. And I think as older workers, we're probably going to want more flexibility in terms of the hybrid model. Mm-hmm. So not having to commute, being able to work from home really does make a big difference. And that flexibility, even when women or men are at home with their children, being able to do some work while you're maybe child rearing, because that's going to be very important.
Right.
Because if we all stop having children.
I think that's really interesting. So how does the vision of age change if people, like you said, are still aging physically, but have access to technology, have adaptation? Does that change? Does that have different attitudinal aspects to it in the workplace? And likely people have been working well past what a traditional retirement has been for a couple of decades by then. So what does it look like in 2050?
Well, I actually have an interesting example to give you today. And this might speak to it a little bit, is when I had my own business, I had an aunt who came and worked with me, and she did everything in the office. I mean, we were small, we were growing, et cetera. I ended up selling the company in 2019, and she is still working for the company. She is turning 81. Okay. Of course, with the pandemic, she didn't have to commute anymore. But what happened is over time, because she would come to me and say, I'm getting really tired. It's really hard to do that commute and all the rest of it. So it's like, okay, let's cut your hours. Let's change this. It's a shorter work day. It's, maybe you're going to work a total of 20 hours a week, but it's 6 hours one day and 3 hours the next day. And, building in wellness things, get out and walk, make sure you aren't just stuck to your desk. You've got the right tools to use. And she loves keeping engaged. It keeps her mind going. She feels it keeps her sharp. She feels that she's got a role to play, that she's contributing. And so it really fulfills a lot of mental health needs of people. And interestingly enough, of course, I have very young people working for me. They loved her because she was such a calming influence, because she'd lived a life. So she could be kind of the office mom kind of thing where, some of the employees would get upset about various things. And, I think as with age, you learn how to not sweat the small stuff as much. You live through this life and you realize that a lot of the things you stressed about really were a big waste of time. So you can give that to younger generations. And if you're all working together, to play off one another, that, being there just as a support, as a person who says, everything will be fine. It's going to be okay. And I found that the younger people, when she got stuck on technology, which she definitely gets stuck on technology, they help her, they walk her through it. They do that and they feel good. Like they feel like they're helping her.
Mm-hmm.
She feels good when she can help them. So it's a very interesting dynamic to watch. And she's in collections. Like she still plays a very important role. And, she now can't get benefits because she's too old.
Hmm.
They cut them off, private benefits through a company. So that's another thing that's going to end up having to be addressed as well if you're working. And, those are important things, that you have drug coverage or, if where you live doesn't have those kinds of things. So there could be other perks as you're older working than just the money. It's to having the medical care. And I know for you in the States, that's a bigger issue maybe than for us here in Canada. But still, not everything is covered. So you get these extra plans and they don't cost companies a lot of money, but it's really valuable to the worker. And that's how I see that could kind of work hand in glove.
It is interesting about the structures that have to support really changing. I just want to explore if I'm, thinking about this, we're talking very kind of white collar knowledge worker type roles. But how do you think about people that have been working in, say, the service industry or something in manufacturing where it's not feasible to come back and even work 15 hours a week if you're working on a manufacturing line and you're 89, but certainly you have knowledge. How does somebody who's not in an office, when we have more physical work, how do you think they'll account for what they need to do and how do they engage that population? Or do they need to rewire and find something in the more white collar world? And so we might even have a glut of white collar workers coming in because people know that they need to have a skill that's more office based. How do you think that talent will normalize in 30 years?
That's a very good question. I do think there's going to have to be some kind of investment in learning something else. And one of the things I sort of pondered is, government, as opposed to, giving your old age security or whatever it is, saying, you know what, if you'll go back and retrain, maybe it's in retail or something where it's not as hard on your body, for example, as being on a production line might be, we'll pay you to go and retrain. And so that you can have that kind of support while you are in the next phase. Because for government and for society to have people retrain, and not everyone will, of course, because some people just won't,
be able to. Yep. Yeah.
For lots of reasons. They're not going to want to. They're not just, I've done this for 50 years and I don't want to do anything else. And there are those people out there, and there probably still going to be those people out there. But who knows, with AI and with all the changes we're seeing, how maybe you, as I said, you're not going to have to learn how to run a hard, complicated software program. Maybe it's just a matter of learning how to talk to a computer.
It's an interesting point you bring up, especially about the automation. So if I'm in a heavy manufacturing facility, if I think about where the talent's going to come from, I am going to have an aging talent population. So maybe I should start thinking about now automating the tasks that are very physically heavy, because if you are directing robots, I mean, really, you're going to be directing the production through automation, and then really looking at how would I teach someone to direct this robot to manufacture. I always think about like LASIK. Thank God that they didn't. I don't think I would ever have signed up for a doctor to work on my eye with his own hand, making those micro incisions. But I certainly was signing up with joy to get the laser robot to go in and do it with precision. So if we're thinking about, how does technology work with the population, taking out the physicality of roles in your environment now, because that's a very long process, might be something to consider, because that means that you can have a much more fluid population, and age is, the physical ability is taken out of that, which might be something to consider. It's also interesting, as you were talking about, we talk about blue collars, typically more physical work, but we have many jobs like your aunt who works at 80, and it's a blue collar, white collar job. It's it's something that is not requiring a college degree, but to sit in front of a computer or whatever the future of computer is. So if we think about more sort of earning levels versus what the work is, there's probably more portability of skills and talent in terms of, we'll be able to get the younger talent to do some of this work that requires something that has more agile mindset, but certainly collections will be collections, death and taxes, right? Those are always present. So it's just interesting to get ourselves out of what has typically constrained the work and think more about how to get the work ready for all ages in your workplace.
To your point about the production line even. I mean, imagine we're sitting in front of a screen where you could have several screens open. You could watch the line, you could watch your area, you could troubleshoot, you would be, you literally could be doing all that from your desk at home even.
Yes. And if with adaptive software and computer and extensions of arms and limbs, maybe that's, if we know it's a heavy physically demanding, well, how do we augment the human that's helping the robot versus the line? Really interesting. In terms of that, I want to go back to one of the comments that you made about having purpose and being open with talent. And I think one of the interesting things is changing the conversation now and getting comfortable with talking about different types of employment. I can't tell you how many of our clients are still talking about, should we mandate being in the office? And it seems like that's just such an old way of thinking in so many places, but the culture isn't ready to move away from some of those old ways of working. So if we think about what is the value of having older talent in the marketplace, because we keep talking about engaging them as almost a service, as opposed to really thinking of the value that they bring into the workplace. And you mentioned the mentoring and the, just the age and experience, but what are some other benefits of having older workers participate and having more than 2 or 3 generations at the workplace?
I think judgment, not everybody has great judgment, but those people who do have judgment tend to keep judgment, and that's a value to, that's a soft skill that, it's hard to teach judgment. So having that judgment there to help make the right decisions within the company, or make the right decisions, if you're younger and you're struggling with your career and not sure what to do, that you could have that person to go to and speak to and help you, maybe decide how to approach a project or a client or that sort of thing. I think you've got a wider perspective then too, because you've lived a life out in the world. Maybe you've done some traveling, maybe you've had a bunch of different jobs, and you've got a much wider perspective that you can bring with you. You understand in certain industries about cycles, that what goes up must come down, and that, how do you ride those cycles out? Oh, I've seen this before. It's going to be okay. Here's some things we used to do. Like, to have that, again, that kind of knowledge of having lived those things. It's about impacting the people around you, because you've got that wisdom, you've got that experience, and you've got that, I will go back to not sweating the small stuff as much, and having people around you that can assure you that, okay, I've seen this like 5 times now in my career. Interest rates go up. I mean, it happens, and they will come down again at some point, or even retail, these cycles of when it's busy and when it's not busy. And so I think there's a lot of value to that. And that can give some confidence and some passing that generational wisdom down.
Yes, it's interesting you say that. I think balancing ambition and energy with experience and perspective. You do not want a team where everyone is out to prove themselves. I would assume as you've come back into the workforce in a different role, in an advisor role, you're there because you're comfortable in what you're doing. You're secure in the knowledge of how you're working, and that your decisions, your motivations, your communication, your engagement all comes from a different place that lends to stability, inherent stability. Even if the other generation isn't seeking it from you, that will balance out the energy in the workplace and make the decisions, like you said, just put some perspective and framing in the cadence and the decisions and the wisdom of the group. So that's a really interesting way to think about balancing it. Kim, it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for sharing your talents and your insight. And I just ask, are there any parting words of wisdom you have for employers as they look forward to 2050?
Well, seniors are going to be your big demographic, and you want to sell to them, likely in many industries. So if you keep them on, they're going to help you figure out how to best sell to seniors.
Got it.
There you go. There's my piece of advice.
And as humans looking to 2050, what do you have for all of us that don't categorize ourselves as seniors now, but certainly will be in that category in 2050? What words of wisdom do you have for us?
Be open, keep a love of learning, keeping engaged, I think, is so healthy for us on so many levels, mental health, even our physical health, to stay, active and just alive. And whatever that means to you, that's, of course, everybody needs to live their life, but it doesn't mean you have to stop working at 65. You can just start the next chapter. and you just rewire.
Thank you so much, Kim. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
That's all for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Talent Time Machine. I loved today's topic. It's been fascinating to explore the idea that retirement, as we know it, may soon be a thing of the past. It may sound scary, but it doesn't need to be. There will be so many opportunities for us to continue learning and growing way beyond what we thought was possible. We hope this episode has given you some insights and ideas for how you can thrive in this changing landscape, whether you're a business owner, young professional just starting out, or an older worker looking to continue contributing to the workforce in new and meaningful ways. As always, we'd love to hear your feedback and ideas for future episodes. Please visit our website or follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and guests. Thanks again for joining us on The Talent Time Machine, and we'll see you next time.